Ladies and gentlemen, today we're diving deep into the story of Steve Harvey, the man who made millions laugh, who built an empire from nothing, who stumbled, who fell, who faced ridicule, who rose again, and who, at one unforgettable moment, was changed forever. This isn't just the story of a comedian. This isn't just the tale of a host you've seen on Family Feud. This is the raw, emotional journey of a man who turned pain into power, who faced humiliation under the spotlight, and who discovered that one turning point could alter the course of a lifetime. But before we dive into the heart of this emotional journey, let me remind you, if stories of resilience, fame, and the human struggle inspire you, make sure you follow this channel. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Childhood roots. Steve Harvey wasn't born into privilege. He wasn't handed a microphone on a silver platter. Born Broderick Stephen Harvey Sr. on January 17, 1957, in Welch, West Virginia, Steve came from a working-class family. His father was a coal miner, his mother a Sunday school teacher. The Harveys didn't have much money, but they had discipline, faith, and the belief that even if the world turned against you, you could still stand tall with dignity. From the start, Steve struggled with something that many comedians later confessed to: insecurity. He stuttered badly as a child. Imagine being a little boy who couldn't even say his own name clearly in front of his classmates. Imagine the laughter, the taunts, the teasing. It's no wonder that young Steve learned to fight back not with fists, but with humor. When they mocked him, he made a joke before they could. When they doubted him, he turned their words into fuel. He didn't know it then, but that stutter, that so-called weakness, was shaping the greatest weapon he would ever use: his ability to connect, to entertain, to own a stage. The dream. No one believed. As a teenager, Steve discovered something inside himself. A dream to become on stage, to entertain, to hold the microphone in his hands and make people laugh. But this dream sounded ridiculous to those around him. His family, though supportive, wanted him to pursue something stable, something safe. After all, who in their neighborhood ever made it out to become a star? Who became rich telling jokes? Teachers told him to think smaller. Friends told him to be realistic. But Steve Harvey had a vision that burned so deeply, he couldn't let it go. He once wrote on a piece of paper in 6th grade, "I want to be on TV." His teacher laughed. The whole class laughed. "Do you even know anyone who's been on television?" they asked. He didn't. But that didn't matter. Because in that moment, Steve understood something most people never grasp. Sometimes, the vision is given only to you. Not everyone will see it. Not everyone will believe. And that's okay. Let that sink in for a moment. How many of us have abandoned dreams because the people around us couldn't see them? How many of us allowed the laughter of others to drown out the voice within? Steve didn't. And let me remind you again, if you're feeling this, if these kinds of stories light something inside you, follow this channel right now, because what's coming next is a story of hunger, failure, and the most unexpected turning point in Steve's life. Rock bottom. But before the success, before the bright suits and television fame, there was darkness. Steve Harvey wasn't a household name. He wasn't even close. He worked jobs that barely kept the lights on. He tried carpet cleaning, insurance sales, even boxing. And yet, the dream never left. At night, he wrote jokes. At church events, he performed skits. Any chance he got to hold a mic, he took it. But the bills piled higher than the laughs. His marriage fell apart. He ended up living out of his car, broke, with nowhere to go. 3 years of sleeping in a Ford Tempo, showering in hotel bathrooms, eating bologna sandwiches. That was Steve Harvey's life. Imagine this. You're a grown man chasing a dream no one else believes in, with nothing to your name but a pillow in the back seat of a beat-up car. People said he was crazy. People said he should quit. But Steve had nothing else left except the dream. And here's the controversial part. He admits he ignored responsibilities. He let his personal life collapse. He gambled everything on this dream. To some, that makes him irresponsible. To others, it makes him courageous. Which side are you on? That debate is part of what makes Steve Harvey's journey so fascinating. The breakthrough, then came the night that changed everything. A small comedy club in Cleveland. He stepped onto the stage with holes in his shoes and desperation in his eyes. He wasn't just telling jokes, he was fighting for his life. And the audience felt it. The laughs were real, the applause thunderous. That night, Steve Harvey knew. This is it. This is what he was born to do. He started getting gigs. Small at first, then bigger. Amateur nights led to comedy tours. He made it to Showtime at the Apollo. He joined the Kings of Comedy tour with legends like Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, and Bernie Mac. Suddenly, the man who once lived in his car was standing in sold-out arenas. The boy with a stutter was making America roar with laughter. But fame brings critics. Steve's jokes weren't always safe. He mixed humor with hard truths. He wasn't afraid to talk about race, class, and politics. Some called him brilliant. Others called him divisive. And once again, the world split in two. Those who loved him and those who couldn't stand him. Seeds of faith. What many don't realize is that Steve Harvey's journey wasn't just about comedy. It was about faith. During those nights in his car, he prayed constantly. He said later in interviews, "Faith is the one thing I had. I couldn't see how it would happen. I just knew God wouldn't leave me in that car forever." That faith carried him through television rejections, through criticism, through personal struggles. He believed that every joke, every humiliation, every mistake was leading him to something greater. And let me say this, if you're still watching, if this story is resonating, don't forget to follow this channel. Because just like Steve Harvey's journey, we're only at the beginning. The most emotional moment of his entire life is still to come. The road to television. By the 1990s, Steve Harvey was breaking into television. The Steve Harvey Show on the WB network became a hit. It wasn't just comedy, it was culture. It spoke to the black community in ways mainstream television rarely did. Steve wasn't just a comedian now, he was a voice. But television is brutal. One day you're a star, the next day you're canceled. Steve Harvey faced rejection after rejection. Some shows flopped, some deals collapsed. He had to reinvent himself constantly. Comedian, actor, author, host. He was a hustler in the purest sense. And yet, all these ups and downs were building toward one emotional moment, the moment that would test him in front of millions. Foreshadowing the moment. Looking back, Steve says the biggest lessons came not from applause, but from embarrassment. And if you know his story, you already sense where this is going. The world saw it live. The mistake that humiliated him, the moment that could have ended his career, but instead changed him forever. But before we get there, we need to understand just how high the stakes were. Steve Harvey wasn't just any celebrity at this point. He was hosting Family Feud. He had best-selling books. He was a global star. He had everything to lose. And when that moment came, the emotional, devastating, unforgettable moment, it forced him to face not just the audience, but himself. The year was 2015. Steve Harvey was at the height of his fame. He had overcome poverty, homelessness, doubt, and decades of struggle. He was no longer the man sleeping in a Ford Tempo, no longer the man rejected by networks, no longer just a stand-up comic grinding in smoky clubs. He was a global brand, the host of Family Feud, the best-selling author who had written Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, a motivational voice millions listened to every single morning on his radio show. And now, Steve Harvey was about to take on the world stage. The Miss Universe pageant, a crown, an audience of millions, and Steve Harvey standing in the spotlight as the host. For Steve, this was another step in his incredible journey. Proof that a boy from Welch, West Virginia, could rise to the most glamorous stages on Earth. But what was supposed to be a celebration turned into one of the most infamous blunders in live television history. The moment was simple, yet catastrophic. After building suspense, after reading the card in his hand, Steve Harvey announced the winner, Miss Columbia. The stage erupted in cheers. The crown was placed on her head. Tears flowed. Cameras zoomed in. Confetti rained. But then came the horror, the truth. Steve had read the wrong name. The actual winner was Miss Philippines. And in front of the entire world, Steve Harvey had to walk back on stage, interrupt the celebration, and admit his mistake. The boos echoed. The cameras captured every trembling second. Miss Columbia stood in shock. Miss Philippines stood in confusion. The world gasped. And Steve Harvey, the man who had once fought to speak without stuttering, the man who had once fought to be taken seriously, stood humiliated on the biggest stage of his life. This wasn't just a mistake. This was humiliation. This was a man, live on international television, being ripped apart by his own error. And within seconds, the internet erupted. Memes flooded Twitter. Headlines declared it the biggest blunder in pageant history. Steve Harvey became a joke. Now here's where the controversy deepens. Some say it was staged, that producers wanted drama, that Steve was set up to create headlines. Others say he simply wasn't careful, that his arrogance led him to rush. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Steve Harvey was suddenly the most ridiculed man on the planet. Imagine for a moment how that feels. You've worked for decades. You've clawed your way out of poverty. You've survived divorces, rejection, homelessness. You finally made it. And then, in one slip of the tongue, in one live broadcast, you become the punchline of every late-night joke. For many people, that moment would destroy them. Careers have ended for less. But for Steve Harvey, that moment became the emotional turning point of his entire life. Because instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of blaming others, Steve Harvey owned it. He went back on stage, he admitted his mistake, and he faced the storm. He apologized publicly, he did interviews, he endured the jokes. And in doing so, he showed something far greater than comedy. He showed character. Let's pause here. If you've ever been embarrassed, if you've ever felt the weight of the world's judgment, you know how crushing it is. Now multiply that by millions of viewers. What would you have done? Would you have crumbled? Would you have lashed out? Or would you have stood firm and admitted the truth? This is why Steve Harvey's story matters. Because in that emotional moment, the world didn't just see a comedian. They saw a man vulnerable, human, flawed, and willing to admit it. And let me remind you, stories like this are why you should follow this channel. We dive deep into the moments that define legends. Don't miss what's coming next. But let's not pretend the recovery was easy. After Miss Universe, Steve Harvey was hated. Miss Columbia's fans called for boycotts. Social media dragged him endlessly. He received death threats. Entire countries despised him. And yet, here's the twist. The very thing that nearly destroyed him became the thing that saved him. The Miss Universe organization didn't fire him. They brought him back. Year after year, despite the controversy, Steve Harvey returned as host. Why? Because people watched. Because controversy sells. Because Steve Harvey's ability to laugh at himself turned disaster into opportunity. That's the brilliance of Steve Harvey. Where others saw shame, he saw redemption. Where others saw failure, he saw a platform. He joked about it on Family Feud. He referenced it in interviews. He owned the narrative before anyone else could. And slowly, the ridicule turned into respect. But let's dig deeper. Because the emotional shift wasn't just about saving his career. It was about saving himself. Steve has said in interviews that after that night, he sat alone and thought about giving up. He thought about walking away from the spotlight forever. But then, he remembered the boy who once stuttered. The man who once slept in a car. The man who once wrote, "I want to be on TV" on a piece of paper. And he realized something powerful. Mistakes don't define you. They refine you. Think about that. How many of us let one failure, one mistake, one bad decision define our entire story? Steve Harvey could have been remembered only as the man who botched Miss Universe. Instead, he's remembered as the man who turned humiliation into triumph. And here's where the controversy really ignites. Some people still won't forgive him. To this day, there are fans in Colombia who despise Steve Harvey. There are critics who say he should have lost his career. But the other side argues, isn't this exactly what makes him relatable? Isn't this what makes him human? Isn't this why millions still watch him, still laugh with him, still trust him? You decide. That's the beauty of Steve Harvey's story. It forces us to confront our own views on forgiveness, redemption, and resilience. Now let's rewind for a moment. Remember his faith? Remember those prayers in the back of his car? That faith didn't disappear after the Miss Universe disaster. In fact, it grew stronger. Steve Harvey credits God for carrying him through that moment. He believes the humiliation was part of a greater plan, that without it, he wouldn't have developed the humility, the resilience, the strength to keep going. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us, that the moments we fear the most, the embarrassments we think will destroy us, are often the very moments that prepare us for greatness. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was pain, real pain, public humiliation. And Steve Harvey had to walk through the fire, not knowing if he'd come out alive. That's why this moment changed him forever. It wasn't just about Miss Universe. It was about realizing that no matter how high you climb, no matter how successful you become, you will fall. And when you fall, the world will watch. The question is, will you get back up? That's why, in interviews since then, Steve Harvey speaks with such raw honesty. He doesn't hide from it. He doesn't pretend it never happened. He embraces it. And that's what makes his story unforgettable. And before we move to the final act of this journey, the aftermath, the legacy, the lessons, let me remind you one more time. Follow this channel, because we're not done yet. The story of Steve Harvey's transformation is about to get even deeper. The days after Miss Universe were chaos. Headlines in every language, social media in flames, fans divided across continents. Steve Harvey's name was everywhere, not for his comedy, not for his television success, not for his best-selling books, but for one mistake. Imagine waking up and seeing your face plastered across every screen, every meme, every late-night joke. Imagine knowing that no matter what you accomplished for millions of people, you'd be remembered for those few seconds of failure. That was the world Steve Harvey woke up to. But here's where the story twists. Instead of letting it bury him, Steve decided to take control of the narrative. He went on his talk show, he went on radio, he did interviews, and he said the words that would define his recovery. I made a mistake, I own it, and I'm sorry. Simple words, but powerful. Because in an era where celebrities often hide, deny, or blame others, Steve Harvey did the opposite. He stood tall in his shame. He admitted it publicly. And little by little, the world began to respect him again. Turning disaster into opportunity, one of Steve's greatest talents has never been just telling jokes. It's turning pain into laughter. And that's exactly what he did. He made jokes about the Miss Universe incident. He turned it into comedy gold. On Family Feud, he teased himself. On talk shows, he laughed along with the hosts. Instead of being crushed by the ridicule, he used it to rebuild. And here's the lesson. When you own your flaws, no one can use them against you. Steve Harvey learned that lesson in front of millions, and it changed him. But it wasn't just comedy. The Miss Universe mistake became a teaching tool. In motivational speeches, Steve talked about the power of bouncing back. He told audiences, You're gonna fall, you're gonna mess up, and people are gonna laugh. But if you get back up, if you keep going, that's what defines you. Think about your own life for a moment. What mistake are you hiding from? What failure still haunts you? If Steve Harvey can survive the humiliation of the world stage, what could you survive if you just chose to stand back up? And right here, let me remind you again, follow this channel. Because the stories we tell aren't just entertainment, they're lessons, they're roadmaps, they're proof that failure is not the end. Legacy beyond laughter. Steve Harvey's. Legacy today isn't just comedy. It isn't just television, it's survival. He is the embodiment of resilience. From a stuttering boy in West Virginia, to a homeless dreamer in a car, to a global star mocked by the entire world, to a redeemed figure still standing tall. The Miss Universe blunder didn't destroy him, it humanized him. It made him relatable. Because deep down, we all know what it feels like to fail. We all know the sting of embarrassment, but not all of us know how to turn it into strength. Steve Harvey showed us how. But let's not pretend he's perfect. Steve Harvey is controversial. His views on relationships, his blunt honesty, his faith-driven speeches, they spark debates everywhere. Some love him for it, some criticize him endlessly. But isn't that what makes him unforgettable? A man who refuses to play it safe. A man who stands in his truth, even when it costs him. The man behind the suit, if you strip away the suits, the television lights, the wealth. Who is Steve Harvey, really? He's a man who still prays daily. A man who still credits God for every step. A man who cries openly when he talks about his journey. A man who, despite the fame, admits that the pain of humiliation is what made him stronger. In interviews, Steve has said, "If it wasn't for that mistake, I wouldn't be the man I am today." Think about that. The very moment that nearly ended him became the moment that transformed him. That's the paradox of life. The things we fear most are often the things that shape us the most. And maybe that's why people still watch him, still listen to him, still quote him. Not because he's flawless, but because he's flawed, because he's human, because he stumbled on the world stage and kept walking anyway. Redemption and respect years later, the Miss Universe mistake is still remembered. But here's the difference. It's not remembered as the end of Steve Harvey. It's remembered as the test that revealed his strength. He went on to host multiple more Miss Universe pageants. He continued hosting Family Feud, making it one of the most watched game shows in the world. He wrote more books, launched business ventures, inspired millions with motivational talks. Steve Harvey turned a global embarrassment into a global testimony. That's why the story matters, not because of the mistake itself, but because of what came after. And if you're watching this right now, let me tell you, that's why you need to follow this channel. Because the next time you fail, the next time you fall, you'll remember this story. You'll remember Steve Harvey, and you'll remember that one mistake doesn't define you. Final reflections. So what is the emotional moment that changed Steve Harvey forever? It wasn't just announcing the wrong name. It was what happened inside him when the world laughed. It was the choice he made when he wanted to give up. It was the decision to own his mistake, to keep moving forward, to stand taller than the shame. That was the moment, that was the fire, that was the transformation. And in the end, maybe that's what makes Steve Harvey not just a comedian, not just a host, not just a celebrity, but a symbol. A symbol that you can survive humiliation. You can survive failure. You can survive the laughter of millions and still rise. So the next time you fall, the next time you stumble, the next time the world points at you and mocks you, remember Steve Harvey. Remember the man who turned the biggest mistake of his life into the biggest lesson of all. And let me remind you one last time, follow this channel because we're just getting started.